welcome back to the next session on operations planning, scheduling, and control. Now let's begin with our learning. In this particular session, we'll be understanding and dealing with defining the gaps in a lean, that is a case study that will be undertaken. The learning objectives. At the end of this particular session, the learners will be able to understand what do we mean by resource management and JIT, that is just in time, and a case study in resource management and JIT, that is defining the gaps in the lean, increasing the ability to solve the problems in your production system. Now let's begin with our learning. First, we'll understand what is the overview of this particular case. In this particular session, first we'll understand what is the overview or what is the introduction of the case and the case study in resource management and JIT, that is just in time, as to defining the gaps in the lean increasing and ability to solve the problems in a production system will be undertaken as a part of an implementation in a manufacturing unit, and how the concept of resource management and JIT can be applied in a business organization or a manufacturing unit. Now let's understand what is the case study. So historical view of a particular lean, foundations of the view of a lean, evolutionary view of a lean, tools and methods of lean are applicable, the systems view of the lean, and the another factor that we have is the philosophical view of the lean, the cultural view of the lean, and it has been composed as a part of an management of lean. So in this particular case study, this case focuses on how we can implement the concept of lean or the lean infrastructure or lean management systems, and the historical perspective has been provided. Within manufacturing management or organization or manufacturing unit, there are various activities and processes that have been undertaken in a various considerable time situation. Those particular time situation are a series of activities, and one activity is always flowing towards the other. The foundational view of lean focuses on what are the various foundational tools and techniques that have been required and how those particular ways the activity can be implemented and those activities can be performed in a better consideration. Then we have the evolutionary view of lean, wherein the various concepts that have been involved, the various tools, techniques, and mechanisms were also being implemented, and then comes the picture of evolutionary view of lean. In case of an evolutionary view, this particular view is been again divided into two parts. The first part, it focuses on tools and methods of view of lean, and the second part focuses on the philosophical view of lean. In case of when tools and methods of lean, it is having a systematic view of lean, and accordingly, the activity is being undertaken on the various consideration as to the systems and set procedures that needs to be followed. The second part focuses on the philosophical view of lean, which always takes into account the cultural view of lean as to what cultural considerations and factors needs to be undertaken in an organization as to how do we control those activities, and it can be implemented in the business organization in the short run as well as in the long run. The total overall composition of these particular activities of lean, it has been undertaken for the better management of lean activities, and the end resultant is how do we create the better productivity. So increasing or improving productivity in the business organization is the major consideration, and the productivity should always be qualitative. And hence, only when the products have been qualitative, they will be preferred or they will be purchased by the consumers, and at a certain level, those particular results will be very positive, which will provide the profits or revenues to the organization in return. So the lean has risen in popularity and it has gained an expanded importance in the recent decades. So despite of various sorts of widespread uses, several business organizations and the companies have been reported problems and the success rate is very low. So lean is offered as a straightforward, all-encompassing ideas. So with respect to the absence of lean, it was been observed that when there was no presence of lean in the business organization, there was a considerable decrease in the procedures, activities, and so on. And hence, the success rate was also very low. But in case of an organization wherein the lean has been offered as a straightforward method, it encompasses all the ideas and all the considerations have been taken as to how we can control a particular data, how the various tools, techniques can be employed and used. And today, in the modern world scenario, the lean has risen in popularity and it is having a greater demand with respect to the previous decades wherein the lean manufacturing came into scenario of 19th century or 20th century. Many researchers from the various fields have looked into the concept of lean, and as a part of an viewpoints, as a result, there are many different perspectives on lean. And everyone is having a different perspectives, a different views, and those particular views are not being discussed in this particular case study, but it focuses on how those particular ideas can be implemented and organization can get benefited of the implementation of a better consideration, that is the lean management techniques. The lean management technique focuses on how the better efficiency productivity can be created. The widespread use can also help to organization as to the increase in productivity, the increase in the quality of a certain task, having a better control on waste management and so on. That is the control on resources. A number of them have the holes in them. That is, they have a certain drawbacks and they have a certain loopholes, which takes into consideration as to the concept of lean. This study or this particular case study will focus on how do we concentrate on the three of them, and those particular values are those particular three components are value, value added, and waste categories. So these are the three components which have been studied in this particular case study. That is the value that has been added, and the waste categories. The jargon problem has been caused by the assumption of V, that is VA and W, which makes it difficult to grasp the process difficulties, that is JP, that is a particular process activity that needs to be undertaken in a manufacturing unit. So as a resultant of this, comprehending lean methodology and truly solving problems is difficult, and the system problem, that is SP. So it also possesses the challenge is generalizing situation without which causing a harm to the other elements of the systematic lean is important. Lean practices emerged over a long period of time, and notably at Toyota. With this particular constitution, as a result of solving a large number of little issues, lean management was started to be accepted. Initially, there was a scenario or a phase wherein the problem solving was being undertaken at the company level or at the department level itself. But after several considerations, the problem solving techniques were being undertaken at the different departments level, at the management consideration, or even at the middle level management level or at the top level management. But when the concept of Toyota production system, this TPS, was brought into existence, this particular research has been focused as to how the various involvement of departments can be taken, and every member or the participants can try to identify and ascertain about the control of materials, control of inventory, and reduction of cycle time, and so on, and how we can implement the concept of lean in the long run. So solving of problem was often little issue in the previous scenario. So as a background to this particular case study, as a result of this, the capacity to comprehend, solve the problems of the group level of a process is used to be accessed as a part of an lean gaps. So it was observed that there were very lean gaps into existence, and in order to increase the capacity, we need to solve the problems at the group level. So individual problem solving was not possible, and hence group solving activity was being needed, and it was essentially identified. The goals of this particular case study is always to identify and improve the delineation of the gaps in order to improve the problem solving abilities at the process group level. So whatever activities that have been undertaken at the process group level, how do we identify those activities? All those activities have been controlled, and how do we solve the problems as to the abilities in the different situation or the scenario. Delineation of gaps in order to improve was also necessary, because we need to identify what gaps are in existence and how do we reduce or minimize those gaps at the early level or at the various levels. Furthermore, a clearer explanation of the gaps allows the academics to have a better knowledge of lean. So when we have a better consideration as to the application of academics, the better knowledge or application of lean can come into existence as to how we can control the operational activities, and in what way those operational activities can be implemented in a business organization as to the consideration of the factors of production in the long run. That is the land, labor, capital, enterprise, and resources. This particular research or the cases is comprised of 5 articles that are based on 4 multiple case studies. So it has the various involvements of those particular case studies and how those particular case studies can be introduced in the simultaneous way. Every adventure must begin at the same point, and the journey began more than 2 decades ago. So as a novice operator at IBM's Järfälla, that is a Sweden factory, the particular researcher was both annoyed and fascinated by how work was being structured, captivated by the synergetic benefits of creative individuals working towards a common goal. So here, the introduction of the case study of a particular individual's journey is been identified as to how the various novice operator activities have been undertaken at IBM. And the location was Järfälla, which is located in Sweden factory. So the person was very annoyed, and he was very happy and fascinated by the activity that has been undertaken in a very structured way, and every activity was being synergetic, wherein when we have a proper establishment of machines, tools, technologies, and those consideration, every activity is been focusing towards or aiming towards a common goal, and hence when we have a common goal, we can have a better creative individuals who are aiming towards achievement of a certain objectives, and a better plan or series of activities can be undertaken in a business organization. a single purpose and dissatisfied with this inefficiency of the plant's organization. And the first effort was to struggle to plan to flow of a just-in-time processes. So initially, the first struggle that was being undertaken by the person, or that is the researcher, and in this particular case study, is to organize a flow process or flow of activities. And for those consideration, the concept of JIT, that is just-in-time processes, was being adopted. Several other attempts to organize efficiently for were also been followed, but they were unsuccessful and the project was shortly abandoned. So simultaneously with the implementation of JIT, the researcher has implemented and undertaken various other process activities, and it was been identified as to certain processes worked in better consideration, but certain processes did not work in those consideration. And hence, the project needs to be abandoned, and accordingly, those activities could not be completed in a better consideration, and several stages that was being activity undertaken in the business organizations or the manufacturing unit. The concept of various concepts such as Six Sigma, business process reengineering, and Taguchi were some of the terms that have been used, and controlling the process doesn't work. So they were all told flatly. That is, every time this perplexed the particular researcher that why hasn't there been any progress? And clearly there was a lot of work involved in the process. So potential, nonetheless, everything remains the same. So there were various other tools and techniques that was being employed or that was being used also, which was either the Six Sigma, the business process reengineering, the Taguchi, and so on. So simultaneously, every activity was been focusing on creating a qualitative product and how do we can improvise the business activities or organize operational activities in the long run or in the short run. But all those activities did not work at the simultaneous level, and at certain stages it was observed that it was leading towards a perplexed situation wherein when we say that it does not work, there was no control on those particular activities, and those particular processes has not been taken as per their progress of the timeline. And hence, the activity that needs to be conducted needs to be very perfectual, must be very significant, and all those activities must have a proper goal or aim as to how do we control the business activities or operations in the short run as well as in the long run. Now let's understand or consider the various definitions that have been associated with this particular case study. The case study focuses on various definitions as to the complexity. That is, how complex do we have, how the situation in the organization can be created in a complex way, and it can be coordinated in a series of activities. The second purpose is focused on continuous improvement. So we must have a process of continuous improvement, which always focuses on how do we improvise each and every single level of activity, and a better consideration of continuous improvement can be implemented in business organization for the consideration of activities in the greater extent of the business consideration. The third perspective focuses on the concept of cost. That is, controlling of cost is essentially important, and when the costs are being controlled in a very effective and better way, we can have a proper control on those particular activities, and in the short run as well as in the long run, the cost reduction or cost control factors are essentially required for the business organization, which will increase or create a certain margin for the development or provision of a certain amount of revenue that can be created in the business. The next fourth perspective is the amount of culture. So what is the value of culture, amount of culture, or the prevailing culture in the business organization? Based on the business culture that has been prevailing, the lean activities can be implemented, and on those particular considerations, we can have a certain understanding as to how do we can implement a better lean culture, and the various continuous improvements or complexity or cost reduction techniques or activities can be undertaken. So adaptability of culture is essentially important. The next fifth perspective is the application of flexibility or availability of flexibility. Flexibility is very important in a business organization, wherein one organization needs to consider as to how those activities can be very flexible. And in a consideration about the business organization, when the activities are very flexible, the movement of goods and services or changes in certain policies will not impact of a certain consideration as to increase or decrease in the productivity, increase or decrease in the general price level, the amount of quantity or quality of goods and services that have been produced. So there should be a proper flexibility as to change in the market conditions, change in the situations, and so on. The fundamental problem. So the fundamental problem that has been associated in the business organization or the manufacturing unit needs to be identified at a greater level, and those particular fundamental problem must be addressed in a better consideration. So whatever fundamental problem that has been associated, we must have a proper clear understanding as to how do we solve that particular problem, and in what way those particular problems can be solved at a greater extent. So solving a fundamental problem is essentially necessary, and all those measures needs to be undertaken. Then the next perspective is how do we identify the gaps? So what are the various gaps that have been also that have been identified, and how do we take various measures to solve that particular gap? So Identification of gap, taking various measures to solve that particular gap, and taking the proper feedback or follow-up about how those particular gaps have been fulfilled is essentially necessary. The next definition that has been undertaken is the concept of industrial processes. So what are the various industrial processes that have been undertaken? How does a goods, commodity, or services move from one level to another level, and how the industrial processes have been fulfilled or they have been undertaken in the business organization. So industrial processes focuses on the assembly line and the movement of goods and services from one level to another level, one machinery to another machinery, one sector to another sector, or one industry to another industry. The next feature or the factor that has been considered is the integrating lean. So integrating lean is the concept of application or using of a certain lean environment and certain culture, and how the lean strategies can be employed in a business organization for better productivity and better operational activities. And lastly, the normal situation. All these situations in the business organization must be very normal, and it must have a certain feasibility or a consideration as to how those activities can be well coordinated in the business organization. Now let's understand what are the various problems that have been associated with this particular case study. The several apparent problems exist in integrating the lean with the organization, and they are described and traced to the gaps in the current approach to the lean. So some pieces are seems to be missing. So in this particular case study, the more focus has been given for integration of a certain amount of lean, and other factors or focuses are not been taken into account for a certain study considerations. And hence, some pieces in a particular organization as a part of a study are seen to be missing, and no proper focus on all the components or factors are being provided. Unfortunately, what we see at happening at these particular case studies, almost all the time it's been dedicated lean efforts that do not result into much improvement. So when the more efforts are not being taken, when all the activities are not being coordinated in a very better and effective way, then we can say that there is no dedicated efforts that have been undertaken, and it does not result in the much improvement. So various improvements or certain consideration as to the benefit in the organization cannot be seen, and hence it leads to a certain amount of problem. Now let's understand what the various possibilities that have been associated as a part of it, profitability. So even though the lean initiatives continue to spread to the other parts of the society, such as healthcare, education, and service industry, the evidence seemed to be gathering that lean was highly difficult to be integrated with the existing processes. So a particular research that was being undertaken by Malk, Altner, Statler, Peterson, Sorquist, Motig, and Alstrom focuses on the concept of applicability of lean in various sectors or various other departments of a particular society. So simultaneously, in case of a manufacturing unit, lean initiatives was being implemented, but in case of other considerations, that is healthcare, education, service industries, and so on, at all the levels or at all the sectors and industry, the lean initiatives was being implemented and the concept of lean was being applied. So simultaneously, what do we feel is unfortunately what we see happening is almost all the time, which is a dedicated lean efforts that do not result in much improvement. So various improvements are not being seen, and from those particular perspectives, the initiatives or the measures that have been undertaken for the betterment of a certain society or a consideration are not observed in case of a lean. The next last feature is the following: the numerous problems and mistakes that have been documented. The research that has been undertaken by Cedar Black, Jeps Lonke, Flinchbach, and Parlino, it focuses on how we can have the various consideration as to the importance or the understanding of lean as a vital importance, and no consensus has been provided as to these entitlements or the features that can be considered. So here again we need to refer a particular diagram as to the historical view of a lean, the foundational view of a lean, the evolutionary view of a lean, and the tools and methods of the lean, which always considers the management of lean in case of an philosophical view of lean, and the entire process or activities of systems view of lean and cultural view of lean are completely different, based on which if the systems view are different or the cultural views are different, the end results will be completely different, and it will be having a total benefit of the organization in the business consideration. So in this way, the management of lean is only focusing on tools and methods and the philosophical view, and not the perspective of systems view or the cultural view. So that is the concept of gap identification or stage number one. So at stage number one, the gap was being identified at the foundational view of lean, that is gap one, that is the value addition, and the waste management, that is the foundation view of lean. The second gap that was being identified as the concept of a jargon problem. So the second problem was in the middle portion, that concept of management of lean, when it has been shifted from the overall perspective, that is a rectangular square perspectives, to a specific perspective, that is tools and methods and the philosophical view. The third gap that was being identified in this particular case study is to the systems problem. So the problem that has been associated with a particular implementation of a lean, only lean was being implemented, and other factor, that is Six Sigma green belt, Kanban, JIT, and so on was not been implemented. And when only one system exists, then all other problems may create in a business organization. Now, what are the various gaps that have been identified? The first gap that has been identified is value adding, and waste assumption, that is V, VA, and W. The second gap that has been identified is the jargon problem. And the third gap that has been identified is the concept of systems problem. So these are the various three problems that have been identified or that have been assessed in this particular case study. So the case study or the various stages of case study are process operation strategy, in which the lean can be applied and accordingly outside the disease scope. So what study that has been undertaken. So study at 4 levels was been undertaken. That is study at the first level as a part of an operator, study at the second level as a part of an industrial engineering, study at the third level as a part of an lean trainers, and study at the fourth level as a part of an lean experts. So that are the various stages of study or the hierarchical levels which was being implemented. Now let's understand what the various options or variables that are available for the better productivity or options. So minimizing the number of operators, minimizing the average size of the buffer in the plant, and lastly, how to control the operations are the various options or variables that are available for the control of operations in the business organizations. So this particular case study or the research, it focuses on how the various varieties of lean perspectives can be implemented, and the first of which was offered by Osterman in the year 2015. So initially, the research was being taken as to how do we apply the perspectives of lean as a composite structure and the comprehensive approach. Each viewpoint forces on the session certain distinct uses and offers distinct but related viewpoints as a part of an lean as a certain concept. So how do we apply a lean in a business organization? How those benefits can be created? So the purpose of this presentation of these particular points of the view is not to offer anything new, but to simply convey some of them. That is how the various other factors are simultaneously important and how do we consider all the factors in consultation or the simultaneous applicability of lean. It also focuses on how a thorough and systematic approach or grasping of lean factors can be considered, and the various factors or perspectives are not new and they are not equal. Some of the points of the view are vague and undefined, and in this particular case study, there is no charismatic approach as to how it can create a certain ideas as to tracing back to their sources either logically or either practically. And lastly, the basic issue with the lean is that takes up the goal of this particular study, which is to identify and fill in the gaps. So gap identification is essentially important, and consideration of those consideration is essential necessary. So now let's summarize what we have learned in this particular session. In this particular session, we have understood what do we mean by resource management and what is the concept of JIT. We have also studied a particular case study on resource management and JIT, that is how do we define the gaps in the lean increasing and the ability to solve the problems in the business organization. I hope you must have enjoyed the learning in this particular session. We'll stay connected and we'll continue with our learning. Thank you for your patience listening. Thank you.